Good morning, everyone. My name is Cesar Alesi Perez. I'm a research associate with the Higher Education Center at the Public Policy Institute of California. Thank you for tuning into our program today, featuring the findings from our new Ppic report, Community College Math in California's New Era of Student Access. Before getting into our report findings, which I know we're all anxious for, we'd first like to thank our funders, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Sutton Family Fund, and the William T. Grant Foundation. We greatly appreciate their continual support of this research and of today's event. For those of you interested, the report as well as the slides from today's presentation are available on our website at ppic.org. And while I'll discuss a lot today, I encourage those that are eager for more to take a look at the report and our extremely detailed technical appendices. And one last thing to mention before we begin, Ppic is a public charity and does not take or support positions on any ballot measures or legislation, nor does it support, endorse, or oppose any political parties or candidates for public office. Now, shifting our focus back to today's program, I will first present some key findings from our report. Then I'll hand the program over to my colleague and co-author, Hans Johnson, to moderate a discussion with an esteemed panel of experts in the field about how to advance student success and equity in the AB 705 era. And finally, we have some time set aside at the end of the program for audience Q&A. If you have any questions for our speakers about the report or panel discussion, please send an email to the address on the screen, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. And if you decided to do so, we'd appreciate you including your name and the name of your organization along with your question. And with that, I will begin the presentation. Great, so the report for which this presentation is based is co-authored by myself and my colleagues, Marisol Cuellar Mejia, Olga Rodriguez, and Hans Johnson. I'd also like to highlight the important contributions made by Mina Dadgar and Sean Pepin, specifically in helping conduct the qualitative portion of our research. And my co-authors and I would also like to send a special thank you to our California Community College system partners. This research would not be possible without the student level data provided by the Chancellor's Office. And lastly, we're also extremely grateful for the valuable insights provided by community college faculty, staff, and administrators during our research interviews. So before jumping into our findings, I'll start by providing just a little bit of context and background for our study, which follows up on several years of research we've conducted on the community college system and AB 705 specifically. As many of you may already know, California's community colleges first began implementing Assembly Bill 705 or AB 705 in fall 2019, making major reforms to assess and place students away from prerequisite remediation and into transfer level courses. Specifically, AB 705 required community colleges to implement changes that would maximize students' likelihood of starting and completing transfer level or degree appropriate coursework in English and math within 1 year. Under the law, colleges must now use high school information such as high school GPA, high school coursework, and grades in specific math and English courses as the primary criteria for placement recommendation. Now, in our report and in this presentation, we use longitudinal student level data to examine how AB 705 implementation has continued to play out as of fall 2020. We focus on math because we have found that implementing AB 705 in math has been a little more challenging than in English for two main reasons. First, historically, math has proven to be a larger obstacle for transfer intending students in terms of gaining access to courses and succeeding once enrolled. Second, institutionally, colleges and districts have found it more difficult and complex and challenging to implement placement and curricular changes in math than in English. So given these obstacles, we believe our work is especially relevant and important to promoting student progress in the community college system. Now, moving on to the exciting portion of the presentation, I'll start out by highlighting the positive. Despite concerns about enrollment declines and heightened economic, social, and health inequities and disruptions brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic, we find strong evidence that colleges continued to effectively implement AB 705 in the spring and fall 2020 terms. Specifically, system-wide access to transfer-level math courses did not change during the pandemic, meaning the progress we saw after the initial implementation of AB 705 in fall 2019 was not lost. We can see in this graph that the distribution of first-time math students enrolled in transfer-level and below transfer-level courses changed dramatically in 2019, with far more students enrolling in transfer-level math compared to enrollment trends in the pre-AB 705 era. And again, promisingly, access to transfer-level coursework in math remained strong in 2020 during the pandemic. This chart here provides the same information as the previous slide, except it now highlights and breaks apart direct transfer level enrollment into SLAM, which includes statistics and liberal arts math courses, and BSTEM, which includes algebra-based courses in business, science, technology, engineering, and math. As we can see here, the distribution of first-time math students enrolling in both transfer level SLAM and BSTEM courses increased greatly in 2019, and this distribution remained relatively steady during the pandemic. And promisingly, while the large increase in SLAM enrollment can be attributed to widened access to statistics pathways, the fact that we also see an increase in BSTEM enrollment tells us that widened access to SLAM hasn't deterred students away from science and engineering majors, and instead, AB 705 related changes have led to more opportunities for students to efficiently sort into appropriate math pathways and avoid below transfer level course placement. Now, shifting our focus from access to course success, we see that this increase in transfer level enrollment and efficiency in sorting into appropriate math pathways has widened opportunities for students to succeed in transfer level math. This chart shows how the share of students completing transfer level math increased immensely in fall 2019 and continued to do so in fall 2020 despite the pandemic. So if we just look at the orange bars here, we see that in fall 2020, colleges saw a 6 percentage point increase in one-term transfer level course completion compared to 2019, when one-term course completion had already increased by 16 percentage points after the implementation of AB 705. And now that we have fall 2020 data, we can also see how completion of transfer level courses within a year, highlighted here in blue, and as of the following fall, highlighted here in gray, has also changed since AB 705. And again, the key takeaway that we get from this is just that overall student success has increased significantly. Interestingly, while shifts in enrollment and persistence may have contributed to the increase in success we see in fall 2020, specifically during a challenging online-only term in the middle of the pandemic, we also heard consistently from our interviews with math faculty that changes that were made within their classrooms and within other classrooms may have also led to this increase in student success we see during the pandemic. Many shared that AB 705 and later the pandemic have reinvigorated conversations around equity, and in some cases have inspired instructors to reform their classrooms to be more equity-minded and provide students with more opportunities to succeed in the classroom. So looking ahead, such conversations and reforms centered on equity will be crucial, especially given the fact that large success gaps between racial and ethnic groups remain despite the overall progress we have seen over the last few years. This chart, which only focuses now on fall 2020 transfer level course completion outcomes among first-time math students, highlights the large disparities in success that persists, especially when we compare Black and Latino students with their Asian and white peers. These wide success gaps suggest that more needs to be done, both inside and outside the classroom, to help marginalized and underrepresented students succeed in light of the unprecedented gains in access to transfer level math that have transpired under AB 705. And so as we've seen, the main driver of progress and student success post AB 705 has been widened access to transfer level courses and access for students to the appropriate math pathways. And with that in mind, the primary concern is our finding that a group of colleges are still requiring or allowing a significant number of students to enroll in below transfer level courses, which raises questions about whether these colleges are indeed implementing AB 705 as the law was intended. So now we shift our focus back to access. As a reminder, statewide, we know that today about 80% of first-time math students enroll in a transfer level math course. However, as this chart shows, this statewide rate masks important variation that occurs across colleges. So in this chart, we categorize colleges based on levels of direct enrollment into transfer level courses among first-time math students and present these categories as access tiers, given that enrollment patterns are highly representative of placement policies at each college. Colleges categorized as high access have direct transfer enrollment that is 1 standard deviation above the statewide mean of 80%, while lower access colleges have enrollment rates that are 1 standard deviation below the mean. Now, if we just focus on fall 2020 access to transfer level math courses, we see that 23 or about 1 in 5 colleges still require or allow a third or more of first-time math students to enroll in below transfer level courses. Of course, we shouldn't gloss over the fact that the fall 2020 distribution of colleges shows immense progress when compared to access rates just 2 years earlier. If we look at 2018, almost all colleges would at that time be considered lower access compared to today's higher standards. But still, the college level disparities that remain are stark. And as we'll see in the following slide, this college variation in access to transfer level courses has large implications for both student success and equity. So The first thing that we look at is the outcomes of students who start in below transfer level courses. If we just focus on the orange bars here, we see that among the fall 2019 cohort, only a third of students starting in below transfer level courses enrolled in a transfer level course as of the next fall. And if we look at the blue bars, we see that only 20% of below transfer level students end up passing the transfer level course after at least 3 main terms from fall 2019 to fall 2020. And as we can see in both cases, these outcomes have not changed much post AB 705. So just to summarize the key takeaway here, these poor outcomes among below transfer level students in math just reinforces the idea that direct access and enrollment into transfer level is crucial in determining student success. Now, this idea becomes even more evident when we compare transfer level course completion outcomes for these same students, first-time math students who started in below transfer level courses, versus 1, otherwise similar students that started in transfer level but with a co-requisite, and 2, versus otherwise similar students that started in transfer level but failed on their first attempt. So first, if we just focus on the top group in this figure, we can see that first-time math students who started in a transfer level math course with a co-requisite, which in most cases are reserved for students who are identified as needing additional academic support. These students are more than 30 percentage points more likely to successfully complete a transfer level course relative to their otherwise similar peers starting in below transfer level courses. And as we can see with the bottom group, even transfer level math students who initially are unsuccessful on their first attempt are still 4 percentage points more likely to complete a transfer level course within 1 year than students who start in below transfer level. And this difference actually jumps up to 7 percentage points if we look at fall to fall completion rate. So again, the main idea here is that the driver of increased success post AB 705 is direct access to transfer level courses. And this key takeaway is important and has large implications on equity, especially when we examine the disparities across student groups in the likelihood that a given student enrolls in a below transfer level course as their first math course. Now, the simplest way to interpret this chart is that positive values, which extend to the right, indicate that each of the groups here are more likely to start in below transfer level courses compared to their respective comparison groups. Alternatively, negative values indicate that the group is less likely to start in below transfer level courses compared to their comparison group. So for example, we see that in lower access colleges, Latino and Black students are 7 percentage points more likely to start in a below transfer level course as their first math course than their otherwise similar white peers. Whereas in higher access colleges, they're actually slightly less likely to do so, which is signaled by the blue bars extending slightly to the left. Now, if we look at these results overall, we have 2 main takeaways. First, Latino and Black students and students belonging to the bottom 4 groups are, for the most part, more likely to enroll in below transfer level courses overall as their first math course. And this is evident in that for most of these groups, the bars for higher and lower access colleges are extending to the right. The second main takeaway is that gaps in below transfer level enrollment are larger in lower access colleges compared to higher access colleges. And graphically, we can see that the orange bars are extending to the right farther. They're larger than the blue bars. So in other words, when access to transfer level courses is restricted or discouraged, as is the case in lower access colleges, marginalized groups are more heavily impacted by this deficit approach to placement and enrollment. Accordingly, policy and continued reform efforts need to continue to address these remaining disparities in access to ensure that equity gaps across and within colleges are effectively closed. And on this note, I'd just like to end by highlighting a few key policy recommendations we make in the report, which we believe would go a long way towards improving student success and equity. So first, as we've seen, access must still be improved. To reduce persistent and inefficient below transfer level enrollment, colleges should directly enroll transfer intending students into transfer level courses by default, especially students that are not pursuing B-STEM majors for which courses like intermediate algebra may not be necessary. So in order to do this effectively, it's imperative that counselors and advisors and faculty work together to ensure common understanding of course offerings and placement policies and provide consistent messaging to students. At the same time, as we've seen, racial equity must be at the forefront of practice and policy, from messaging to student supports to course design. After addressing persistent gaps in access to transfer level coursework, colleges and math departments must expand necessary supports both inside and outside of the classroom for all students, but especially those from marginalized communities, and not just in introductory math coursework, but in more challenging and advanced courses as well. And looking ahead, these reforms will require continued conversations around racial equity and willingness from both staff and instructors to implement equity-minded changes. as well as continued research to better understand what support structures work best for students. Now, that concludes the presentation portion of our event today. As I mentioned earlier, we've only just touched the surface on our report findings. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask for our audience Q&A, please send them our way at ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. And for more technical questions on our research, we'll be sure to respond a little later via email to ensure we provide a proper response. And for those hungry for more, please check out our full report online and on our website, though I urge you to wait until after our panel discussion, which will surely expand upon our report findings and recommendations. So with that, I'd like to now welcome Senior Fellow and Director of the PPIC Higher Education Center, Hans Johnson, who will moderate that discussion.
Thank you, Cesar, for a succinct yet thorough presentation. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending. We have almost 500 registrants for today's event, representing a broad cross-section of stakeholders from all parts of California and even beyond. In the interest of time, I will keep the introductions to our panel brief, but we do have bios available on our web page for today's event. We have an excellent panel today, and I am excited to introduce them. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. First, we have Aisha Lowe, the Vice Chancellor of Educational Services at the California Community College Chancellor's Office. Next, we have Virginia May, Professor of Mathematics at Sacramento City College and the Vice President of the Academic Senate for California Community Colleges. And finally, Myra Snell, Professor of Mathematics at Los Medanos College and the co-founder of the California Acceleration Project. And as a reminder, I will be asking them a series of questions, but we will be able to take audience questions at the end of this session. And please use the email address that was provided earlier to send those questions in. So to the panelists, welcome. And thank you for joining us today and for sharing your expertise and insights. A year ago, each of you joined my colleague Marisol Cuellar Mejia to discuss findings from a PPI study at that time that examined the first term of implementation of AB 705. And now, of course, we've seen a full year later for fall 2020, but the first term, of course, was fall 2019. And last year's event highlighted the dramatic transformations of AB 705 in terms of broadening access to transfer level courses, leading to large increases in the number of students completing transfer level courses and reductions in racial equity gaps, especially in access. And I'm going to remind you of a few things that each one of you said and ask you to comment on them. So in that conversation, you reflected on the work that still needed to be done moving forward. For example, Myra, you emphasized that structural barriers to placement had not been fully eliminated. Aisha, you had stated that addressing persistent racial equity gaps requires reforms to curriculum, pedagogy, and classroom culture. And Virginia, you noted that while co-requisite support is a great solution for some students, others might need other kind of learning opportunities and support. So let me start the conversation by asking you now, 1 year later, whether you think the system has made progress in the fronts that you highlighted, and if so, in which ways? And Myra, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Okay. Hans, first of all, I want to just thank you and Cesar, Marisol, and the rest of the PPIC team for your persistence in examining the impact and the equity implications of AB 705. I also want to again acknowledge the tremendous amount of work that's been done by the Chancellor's Office and by colleges to implement this historic legislation. The payoff for students has been remarkable and unprecedented, even in the face of a global pandemic. Now, last year we learned from the PPIC report that in the first year of mandatory implementation, AB 705 reforms nearly quadrupled the transfer level math completion rates for Black and Latinx students. And these groups were completing transfer level math at rates that exceeded white completion 4 years prior. But there were large completion gaps, and these gaps remain, as we heard from Cesar's presentation. So did we make progress this next year in removing the structural barriers that are impeding completion and driving inequity? Unfortunately, the answer is no, not as fall 2020 anyway. We heard in Cesar's presentation that about 20% of colleges continue to have enrollment patterns that severely undermine the promise of AB 705. And at these low access colleges, a third or more of their students are still starting in math courses below the transfer level. We also know that these colleges serve a disproportionately larger share of the state's Black and Latinx students. And so as a result, the state has not closed the access gap. And Black and Brown students are still more likely to start math below the transfer level. And as a result, they're less likely to complete it.
Thanks, Myra. Virginia, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you so much. And I'm honored to be here and working with you all. And I just want to say what great data you have collected. And I encourage everyone to take a deep dive into that, the appendix that's there. Really rich data. So I think that we have laid the foundation for moving forward in addressing the concerns that I had mentioned. And so we began, and we really must continue on building equity-minded and culturally appropriate instructional practices, incorporating a multi-pronged approach to meet the diverse needs of individual students, which includes supporting a wide range of skills and abilities. Supporting faculty growth is critical as they shift from a content-focused approach to a student-focused approach, as is providing additional in-classroom supports like deploying instructional support staff, embedded tutoring, supplemental instruction, and more instructor-student contact time. Continuing analyses on the data collected by Ppic will really help us to zero in on the areas that need to be addressed. So I do see that we have made some success, but there's so much more room to grow, to learn in meeting the needs of our students, and especially our underrepresented students, our Black and Brown students. And we can't stop now, and the momentum is helping us to move forward, and we have to keep moving.
Thanks, Virginia. And that's a good segue, Aisha. As a reminder, you'd noted the need to reform what happens in the classroom to improve equity. And maybe you could tell us some progress on that front, or if there's been a lack of progress, what we need to do.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Hans. Really sort of echoing what Virginia and Myra have just said, there has been progress and there is still so much work to be done. And I think that's going to be the answer across the board. But I think there definitely has been progress in community colleges addressing curriculum, pedagogy, and classroom culture. Much of that has been a result of the increased focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the wake of really what was a national racial reckoning of 2020. That work has been focused on diversifying curriculum, investing in culturally responsive pedagogy, and really doing the work necessary to become anti-racist institutions. And so we see examples of that where we have some colleges that have been reviewing their courses from top to bottom, reviewing their course outline of record, their student learning outcomes, the syllabus, the course content to align it better with diversity, equity, and inclusion standards and outcomes. We've seen other colleges embedding growth mindset curriculum into their courses and making that content available to their faculty, including their adjuncts. We've seen other colleges investing in professional development focused on classroom climate and pedagogy. And even from the Chancellor's office, we've been focused on proliferating communities of practice across the state through IEPI towards these topics as well. So progress has been made and there's much more work to be done.
Yeah, thanks, Aisha. And I think you're right. That's going to be a common message of AB 705 implementation still going forward. Having said that, one piece of evidence that we found in this study was that transfer intending students are consistently, and I would say uniformly, less likely to complete a transfer level math course when they are either required, encouraged, or allowed to enroll in below transfer level courses. And we looked at that, of course, system-wide, but also college by college. So from your perspective, why do we continue to see a number of colleges where a significant share of first-time math students still start in those courses, and realizing that in many cases, their neighboring colleges are not doing that. And so I'm going to start off here. Aisha, I'll have you go first this time.
No, such a great and important question. And I think one thing we have to really think about is, right, the reality of what systems change requires, right? So I think one of the factors here is that, it's not easy or a simple task to ask people and institutions to transform practices that have been their norm for decades, right? Practices and norms that are based in deeply held beliefs, that are supported by what educators have experienced. But as we continue to see some colleges continuing to invest in below transfer level courses, I think part of the reason that we see that is because that's what they know, right? It's what they've done. It's the tradition, it's the practice, and they sincerely believe it is best for students, right? We have to know that and understand that. I've never run across an educator in our system or elsewhere that is sitting back saying, I know this is horrible for students and I'm going to do it anyway, right? They sincerely believe that is what is best for students. So the truth of what they know and believe is that students come to our colleges with different levels of content knowledge, different K-12 experiences, different levels of academic self-efficacy, different needs that need to be addressed for them to be successful. What we are starting to understand, right, as we bring people along in shifting their beliefs and their mindset, is that what is not true is that remedial education is the answer to that problem, right? Remedial education is not the effective source of support for those differences that our students bring into our system. And so I feel like what we're wrestling with is really the challenge of systems change work. Policy reform is a catalyst, but you cannot legislate the hearts and minds of people, right? Effective systems change requires a transformation in what people believe, because people change systems and people have to change in order to affect systems change. So I think that's why research like this is so important, right? This provides important proof of effective practices that can be utilized to then help people see things differently, shift their mindsets. And as we do that hearts and minds work to shift mindsets, then we'll continue to see deeper implementation in policy.
Thanks, Aisha. And let me remind our audience that we, the authors at PPIC of this study, have detailed tables in our appendices that are college by college. But we're also happy to respond to any questions you might have or additional information you'd like, either about your college or in general about the research. And so send an email to any of the authors and we would be happy to pursue that if we don't get to your question today. And we hope, obviously, that we will be able to do so in about 15 minutes. We'll be turning to audience questions. So, I'll now turn this over to Virginia with the same question. What do you see in terms of why some colleges might be more resistant than others and be funneling more students still into below transfer level courses?
Oh, thank you, Hans. So this is a great question. The community college system has completed the first of many steps of the implementation of AB 705, and I do mean many steps. To think we got it right the first time around would be kind of, amazing, but we're getting there. And so we really want to put a focus on closing equity gaps, particularly for our Black and Brown students. So of the many placement protocols we have seen, the vast majority of colleges generally provide students with access to enroll in transfer level SLAM courses. And for those students that are interested in a BSTEM major that have completed intermediate algebra or algebra 2, they have access to enroll in a BSTEM class. And this would be with, some require support, some don't require support. But in line with guided pathways frameworks, faculty and colleges strive to meet the needs of the whole student from start to finish, building conditions to create self-agency for students that affect self-efficacy. And that is key. This is key for increasing the success of underrepresented students, and in particular, Black and Brown students. Placing and encouraging students to enroll in transfer level coursework has been a success for so many in our system, and we need to celebrate that and acknowledge that. And even more so, it's been successful for white and Asian students. We're not saying that it's not good for white and Asian students, but we really need to turn our focus into our Black and Brown students moving forward. So we are not done. Faculty are taking a deeper dive to address the persistent inequalities, both in and out of the classroom, that continue to exist, and they need support to do this. This new classroom is no longer based on a series of courses scaffolded by prerequisites, but rather based on meeting students where they are, acknowledging and teaching a much more diverse population in regard to diversity, ethnicity, and culture, as well as a broader range of skills. Faculty are seeing a need for additional student contact time, I mentioned earlier, more in-class assistance with instruction and tutoring, and more structured out-of-class opportunities for students to seek help. We need to hear from faculty teaching those courses and from the students opting to enroll in below transfer level courses as to why they made that choice. Some colleges are doing this, but it needs to be done on a broader scale. In addition, some students are opting to not enroll in a math course at all if they have no access to below transfer level courses. Concerns included, and I mentioned this somewhat last year, that they do not have enough time in the day or the week to take transfer level English with support, transfer level math with support, other courses that they're interested in, as well as their obligations for jobs and families. And this is where we need to take a deep dive into finding out how we can help students in moving forward and get them in the courses they need to be successful. So this is where system partners must come together now using appreciative inquiry to focus on the most vulnerable student populations and fully addressing the racial inequities that persist in providing the best educational opportunities for our students.
Thanks, Virginia. Myra, as a part of the California Acceleration Project, you've worked with a lot of colleges over the years as they implement now AB 705. And I'm wondering if you could reflect on this same question. What do you see as some of the impediments to full implementation?
Well, I think that my comments are really going to mirror what Dr. Lowe has already said, that just as I think it's really rooted in the way that colleges view their students. And just as budgets are a statement of values, course schedules are a statement of beliefs and beliefs about what's best for students. So we know that, and this report makes it clear, that many colleges continue to operate from a belief that a lot of students don't belong in transfer level math, and they should have options to enroll in courses that the data shows are going to hinder their academic progress. And the reasons that colleges give are logical on their surface. So they will say things like, students graduating from local high schools are not well prepared. Our local high schools are under-resourced. They'll express the belief that older students that are starting college later in life really need to redo high school math because it's been a long time. They'll express the belief that disabled students can't handle transferable coursework, or the belief that students who are interested in STEM but have weak math preparation should start in lower levels of algebra. All of this seems logical on the surface, but these beliefs remain impervious to what the data is showing. To date, we know from statewide studies consistently that students are more likely to complete math milestones to transfer if they begin in the transfer level course and receive concurrent supports if needed. And this is true of all the students that we just mentioned. So I think also if we look at local data, a lot of colleges I have heard express the belief that, yeah, we know what the statewide data shows, but it's not true for our students. And CAP analyzed, and so did the Chancellor's Office and the RP group, the 114 placement validation reports that were submitted by colleges last year. And we found that colleges that continue to enroll students below the transfer level were not meeting the AB 705 standard of maximizing completion. In other words, their placement and enrollment practices were hindering student progress in completing transfer level math. And over half of the colleges were still producing a disproportionate impact on Latinx and Black students because of their placement practices, or I should say enrollment patterns. So even when colleges acknowledge this data, they will still argue, as we heard Jenny May just argue, that students should have options. And it is, I think, something that we need to, as a system, interrogate very deeply about where else in our system do we continue to believe that students should have options that harm their academic progress, and that we should then say that this is an attribute of student agency, that we allow them to choose things that we know unequivocally from the data are going to impede their progress. So I still think, and I feel that we hear a lot of reasons, and I want to reinforce what Dr. Lowe said, that I think this is part of systems change, that our own logic is not being held up, supported by the data, and we've got to really interrogate why it is colleges are still thinking that options should mean bad options, as opposed to options meaning what Jenny had spoke to in her first remarks, which is a whole plethora of concurrent supports that will ensure that they are making progress toward their academic goals.
Thank you. So Aisha, you and the Chancellor's Office recently released a guidance memo outlining requirements for the next phase of AB 705 implementation. And that memo noted that districts and colleges must take all necessary actions to equitably ensure students' entrance into, support in, and successful completion of transfer level courses. So, Aisha, I wonder if you could tell us what colleges are expected to do to improve equitable placement and completion. And Myra and Virginia, I'd like to ask you if you have any insights on how individual colleges are reviewing and implementing the requirements outlined in the memo. And for full disclosure, PPIC recommended that transfer intending students be opted in, automatically placed into transfer level courses that were appropriate for their major pathway, either in SLAM or in BSTEM, as one way to ensure that students are in those courses from the outset. So Aisha, could you talk a little bit about the memo, and then Virginia and Myra, maybe you could talk about how colleges are reacting and viewing the memo and their actions.
No, absolutely. So yes, we did recently, just before Thanksgiving, release a memo as well as improvement plans for improving our implementation of AB 705 and getting to what we're calling full implementation by fall of 2022. So that recent memo and these improvement plans really do represent an essential reset for AB 705 implementation for our system. As we've discussed today, we have made progress, right? And I like to message that very clearly. The California Community College system has been implementing AB 705, and we have made substantial progress. And when we reflect on systems change for a system of our size, to have seen the results in 2 years that we have seen cannot be understated. It is substantial, right? So we always have to keep in mind that we want to acknowledge and celebrate the progress that has been made, and then keep our eyes focused on the work that's still to be done. And so this memo, these improvement plans represent a next important step in that continued work of implementation. And what you'll see in those materials, and they're on our website for any who are interested in digging into the details, cannot cover it all. It's a 9-page memo. There's lots of information in the memo. But as a high-level summary, colleges are being directed to shift to transfer level math and English courses by default for the vast majority of students. Why? Because as Myra just said, that's what the data is showing us, right? We have statewide data. We had every college submit data specific to their college. We launched a whole throughput dashboard, looking at an even fuller set of data for fall of 2019. We have yet to see evidence of any particular student group or program where beginning below transfer level is most beneficial for students in terms of maximizing their likelihood of then entering and completing those essential gateway courses within 1 year. We don't see it, right? So we are leaning into the evidence and the research that has been done to direct colleges to follow the evidence, right? That we need to shift to transfer level math and English courses by default for the vast majority of students. Now, that said, that does not mean that pre-transfer level courses are disallowed. So what we're also requiring through this memo and these improvement plans, which has a corresponding data template for colleges to complete, is what we're saying to our colleges is, if you can demonstrate with data-based evidence that there is some particular program or some particular group of students on your local campus, and you can show in your data that when those students begin pre-transfer level, they are able to then enter and complete the necessary transfer level or gateway course within 1 year, we are still providing the opportunity for colleges to demonstrate that. So what we're saying to our colleges is follow the data. The data is showing, and in that memo, we have links to a number of different research reports looking at throughput, right? The successful completion of gateway courses across a number of different variables and disaggregations. It's all pointing in the same direction. We're saying to our colleges, follow the data. We need to shift to transfer level. But if you have proof that there is some particular segment of your local population, whether it's a specific program, specific group of students, and your data can show that, yes, for this group, starting below transfer level actually is effective, that opportunity exists to prove that. So what we're really saying to colleges is, let's follow the data and show your work, right? If we can prove it works for students, then we will support it. Where we cannot prove it works for students, our message to our colleges very strongly is, we have to stop doing things that don't work for students, right? When we have the data and information, if the data and information is showing us it doesn't work for students, then that gets into that mindset work that we have to then interrogate and challenge our beliefs and our assumptions. We need to follow the research evidence. Lastly, I'll say additionally, within that memorandum and the improvement plans, we have provided the colleges with a whole suite of promising practices that have come from the field, right? That colleges are implementing, that their colleagues are implementing, and we're highlighting those as promising practices that we are strongly encouraging colleges to invest in and to implement, so that they can really address, right, the full ecosystem of equitable placement and completion, which is not just about placement, it's about placement, enrollment, support, and student completion.
Thanks, Aisha. Virginia and Myra, do you have any additional comments you'd like to make on the memo?
I'll just say that I am in contact with math departments that are from lower access colleges, and this memo is clear, it's compelling, and I do see movement at those colleges with plans to completely default enroll students at transfer level in fall of 2022. That said, I also have heard from some, particularly one large district of colleges that are lower access, still a complaint that you just don't understand our students. So again, I think Dr. Lowe's call for looking at your local data. There has not been a discrepancy between local data and statewide studies. So I'm hopeful. I think this memo is going to go a very long way, and the clear guidance and the large toolbox of strategies for improving implementation, I think is going to go a long way toward improving not only access, but completion for our students.
Virginia.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you, Aisha, for that brief overview. It's really a hot topic right now. I've received a number of inquiries about the memo, and most faculty, well, nearly all faculty are supportive of full access to transfer level mathematics. I mean, it's changed over time, but it really is. I'm hearing that they are fully supportive. What they don't want to happen is that they don't pay attention to the students that may be left behind. And there's some really valuable data in the technical appendices that Ppic has put together to really kind of dive down deep and look at that. I'm seeing colleges that are almost eliminating their pre-transfer courses completely from their offerings. And then also looking into possibilities of offering non-credit course and other co-requisite or concurrent supports that may not even be unit-based, but outside supports for students. So this is still a work in progress, and the momentum is here now, and we have support now to address all the concerns And I really encourage us to keep moving forward in doing that.
Okay, so I have one more question before we turn to audience questions, and let me remind the audience to send your questions to ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. And I'm going to roll up a whole bunch of ideas into one question here, so apologies for that. We still see, even for students and colleges that are placing almost all their first-time math students directly into transfer level courses, that a large share of students are not completing those courses, either in that term or within the next year and following fall. Still, success is far higher for every single group than it was when students were being placed in below transfer level courses. But clearly we need to provide more effective supports for students going forward to find ways that they can succeed, especially in math, which has been the largest impediment compared to English, at least, in terms of student persistence. Going forward at PPIC, we're thinking of what kind of additional research is necessary to understand where student pathways are more successful and how we might identify and then grow those programs or supports system-wide. So I'm wondering, a lot to unpack there, if each of you want to talk about improving student success, even among those who are going straight into transfer level courses. And I'll let you jump in as you will. Virginia?
Yeah, so I think we need to continue this research, and we're off to a great start. I think we need to go in and survey and interview faculty. What do faculty need to be successful, and include a wide range of voices, from the enthusiasts all the way to the skeptics. What better way to bring people in to make change than to let them talk about, to share what it is that they need in their classrooms to be successful. We also need to survey and interview students, especially those students that started in transfer level with or without support that weren't successful, or the ones that started in below transfer level, and ask them why they did that, what they would need to encourage them to start in transfer level, and just take a deeper dive there. Go to many more colleges, find out from those students, why is it that they're having these, that they're not being successful in the fashion that we're hoping that they are. And there's data in the appendix that supports looking in certain areas there. And most importantly, really dig deep into what else we can do to provide pathways and supports, really to close those persistent gaps along racial lines. There's so much more we can do, and we have the momentum to do it now.
Thanks. Myra?
I would encourage PPIC to continue to look at these more longitudinal completion metrics in BSTEM. There was interesting things in this report. I was ecstatic to see that the fall 2019 cohort of BSTEM students was much more likely to complete Calculus 1 than previous cohorts. But I still see within the field many colleges with long transfer level math pipelines before Calculus 1. So you will see colleges with completely open access pre-calculus that leads to Calculus 1 the next semester, all the way to colleges that have 3 transfer level math courses before students can access Calculus 1. So I do still think that there are structural barriers in the STEM pipeline that are probably impacting completion and equity of Calculus 1, which is an important milestone. So I would encourage more study there. I also feel that I would like to see more studies around the students who are not successful. You had in their first attempt at transfer level, and this current study started to pick away at that, right? By showing that even students who do not pass a transfer level course in their first attempt are more likely to persist, try again, and pass that course than students who begin below the transfer level. I also found it really interesting. So I would encourage more looking at that. What else can we find out about those students? And it was interesting to me that looking in the appendix at the students in statistics enrolled in co-requisites, finding that when you controlled for non-math GPA at the college, you closed the gap between the co-requisite student success rate and those who did not need support or did not have support success rate. So that really suggests right there, research like that begins to point us to actions that it's not that they need more math, right? It's that we really need to think about a broader suite of doing college strategies for students who are coming in and struggling in math. And by the way, everything else. So I think there's pieces that you started here that I hope that you continue with.
Exactly. And we're excited to continue with that. And Aisha, I'm going to ask you to narrow in on some of the things that happened during the pandemic that helped students in terms of, for example, what we heard in our interviews was changes in grading policies, allowing more flexibility for due dates and other kinds of classroom procedures that allowed students to succeed even in the online setting, and whether we should continue those going forward.
No, we absolutely should. I would say this is one area where I am proud of our system. I definitely feel like the community college system rose to the challenge of the pandemic with great empathy for our students. And that empathy led to sweeping reforms and improvements across our campuses and focusing in on student-centered policies and practices. So I think the strong encouragement for our system is let's not go back to normal, right? In terms of undoing things that were really student-centered and helpful for students, whether that was streamlining administrative requirements and removing unnecessary hurdles, allowing flexibility, as you mentioned, Hans, in the classroom, really focused on students having opportunities to demonstrate their learning and sort of shifting our focus on when it's demonstrated and being more flexible in those timelines. There was a lot of revising of policies that we realized as we interrogated them weren't evidence-based. They didn't have any particular benefits for students or even for the institution. And so we changed them. So I think it's so important that we not go back to normal in those ways, that we continue policy changes, practice changes that were beneficial to institutions, beneficial to students. I feel like we alleviated so much administrative burden, not just for the students, but for the colleges, right? All these paperwork that we were tracking and having multiple steps to processes. Our colleges did an amazing job of streamlining so many of those things. And so I hope that we continue that. Certainly where we have the authority within Title V at the Chancellor's Office, we are making some of those changes permanent in regulation. In full support, right, from the system, where our system faculty, our system chief instructional officers have said, yeah, we don't know why we do this. Let's change it permanently and change it in ways that benefit students. So that's work that will continue. And we certainly encourage our colleges to continue some of the great changes that to take on.
Thank you, Aisha. And now let me welcome Cesar back to the panel. And turn to audience questions. The first question is actually for you, Cesar, and it comes from Mallory Newell of De Anza College. And she would like you to repeat the results that compare students who initially fail the transfer level course to students who start in basic skills below transfer level courses. And she notes that this is an important distinction.
Yeah, thanks, Hans. So just to provide some context, which I think actually Myra actually summarized well a few minutes ago, one of my last slides in the presentation compared the regression adjusted difference in transfer level course completion between first-time math students who started in below transfer level courses versus one otherwise similar students that started in transfer level with the prerequisite, and two versus otherwise similar students that started in transfer level but failed on their first attempt. So I'll just focus on the second comparison group since that's what the question is alluding to. And so in that analysis, we found that transfer level math students who initially are unsuccessful on their first attempt are still 4 percentage points more likely to complete a transfer level course within 1 year. So they re-enroll and complete it afterward. And then this difference actually jumps up to 7 percentage points if we look at fall to fall. So not just in the next term, but maybe in the next fall over the next year. And of course, while we acknowledge that a student failing a course on their first attempt is it's not optimal and may have negative effects on their GPA and financial aid eligibility, our key takeaway is that the access to trans-level courses always provides students with better opportunities to succeed in those courses. So if a student fails the trans-level course on their first try, they're still more likely to eventually pass it compared to students who start in below transfer level.
Thanks, Cesar. The next question comes from Michelle of the California Virtual College Online Network of Educators. Have the increases in online courses through COVID influenced students' ability to access transfer level courses? And should we be thinking strategically about expanding access to online transfer level math and English courses going forward? So who would like to answer this question? All right. Oh, Aisha, good.
I was going to say, that is a good question. I will not pretend like I have the answer to that question. But I think that's an important one to add to the list of research for us to really look at, what has been the pandemic effect here in terms of the modality courses have been taught in. Do we see any differences in student outcomes between distance education courses versus traditional face-to-face courses? I think that's an important question we need to dig into, because our colleges are certainly grappling now with how much to go back to normal, how much to continue to expand distance education. So that's an important question I think we need to further investigate.
I agree. Okay, and then we have a really good question from Anya Fink of Cabrillo College. She asked us to talk about the math competency requirement for associate degrees and whether it might be revised to be a transfer level requirement to replace the intermediate algebra level. So this is a little bit in the weeds maybe, but it's a big issue and a big question. Just as an aside, our study focused on transfer intending students, partly to avoid the problem of identifying whether below transfer level was sufficient for a student. If you're transfer level, clearly it isn't. But for students who are seeking only an associate's degree, right now, you don't necessarily have to take that transfer level course. Virginia, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on this.
Sure. So, well, currently 5C, that's the Community College's Chancellor's Curriculum Committee. They are examining that section of Title V. It's 55063 for all you Title V wonks out there. And they're going to do a complete overhaul of that section. And so that's one of the areas they are examining. And the last time we changed the math competency and English competency at the same time, it took several years. We did broad vetting among faculty statewide. I mean, when we're talking about competency requirements, that's no longer just, a discipline concern. It's faculty, from many, many disciplines overall, because we're preparing the whole student to be educated and move out into the workplace, or and if they're not transferring, they would be going directly to the workplace. So these are questions that will be going through the Academic Senate, that will be going through 5C. We'll be working with our chief instructional officers, our chief student services officers, and just having, broad conversations.
And we have a number of questions I'm just going to generally characterize as, what about other students? So we just talked about students who are only looking for an associate's degree, or those who are only seeking a certificate. And to be clear, just as at the outset, our study finds that the vast majority of students entering community colleges do intend to transfer. It's not everybody, of course, but most do. But there are still students who aren't seeking to transfer. And Myra, I'm wondering if you want to reflect on those students who are looking for certificates, or just, again, the associate's degree. We already touched on some of that.
I think certificates are sort of a special class of academic goals, because they are often very, very specific and job related. So I'm going to talk about the associate degree students who are stating that they do not intend to transfer. There are many colleges in the state that are have either completely gotten rid of pre-level math, or have very small number of sections. And that these colleges, students who are associate degree students who say that they don't intend to transfer, are still taking transfer level math. They might be taking, if they're not in a math intensive program, they might be taking a liberal arts math course, for example. And we're seeing much higher pass rates in those courses than we see in intermediate algebra. We also have a number of colleges that have successfully articulated for quantitative reasoning credit upon transfer to the CSU, technical math courses that now get quantitative reasoning credit for transfer. So instead of having your students who are in your electrical technology program take intermediate algebra, have them actually take a technical math course that's contextualized within their program and articulate that to the CSU. So again, I think without even changing Title V, we have a lot of precedence in the state and leeway in students clear transfer level milestones that might encourage them to transfer later if they change their academic goals. And there's good examples throughout the state of where this is happening.
Thanks, Myra. So I'm afraid we have reached the end of our event today. Let me again thank Cesar for his presentation and what I'm going to, from here on after, refer to as our dream team of panelists. Maybe we'll be able to do this again in another year and see even more progress. I would like to thank our funders and especially our audience for joining us today online. If you pre-registered for today's event, you will receive a survey, and very much appreciate it if you could take a couple of minutes to respond and let us know how we did. And thanks again to everyone. Please be safe and have a very good afternoon.